Hello, everybody. Here on the first recording of a session for the European Rotors show. The November European Rotors will be held for the first time in Cologne, organized by the European Helicopters Association in cooperation with EASA. The event is succeeding the EASA's well-known Rotorcraft and eVTOL Symposium. Today's online panel will focus on the eVTOL topics at the European Rotors and will discuss awaited proposal from EASA, the means of compliance with the special conditions VTOLs, which was really discussed hot after being published last year at the Rotorcraft Symposium. So I will introduce my guests, which we have for this first online panel here, which is David Solar, head of the VTOL department at EASA. And then we have Peter Möller, chairman of the European Helicopter Association. Then we have Hendrik Boelens, CTO of Volocopter. Then we have FrédéricBruder, managing director of ADACLuftrettung. And finally, Tobias Bretzel, who is a project manager at European Rotors at in Cologne at the AERO Friedrichshafen, who is a partner for organizing the exhibition. And Tobias at the same time is working at the AERO and the e-flightexpo in Friedrichshafen, which is happening since more than 20 years in Friedrichshafen for the general aviation. David, you will have had a lot of requests for this means of compliance over the last months.
Thank you, Willi. Indeed, I'm glad to be with you today to speak about the evolution of the Rotorcraft and eVTOL Symposium and the within the European Rotors event. Maybe as a short introduction, EASA is the European Union Aviation Safety Agency. It's a body of the European Union and it's based in Cologne. And we are dealing with all aviation matters. I'm leading the VTOL department, vertical takeoff and landing, and we are responsible for all the certification of the VTOL vehicles with capabilities including drones with a max take-off weight above 450 kilograms. eVTOL is booming, at least since a couple of years, and it has led us to create within the department specific sections called eVTOL and innovation projects to deal with this new community, which is bringing new challenges for compared to legacy aviations. So we had to rethink of way of working, of way of doing, focusing on safety, of course, it is our duty, but also enabling innovation. So the agency, as I said, created a new team for that, and hopefully leading the way towards more electrical aviation, greener aviation. So since now you mentioned the publication, but even earlier, of the special condition VTOL, we have done quite a lot of work. And to enable this kind of operations, vehicles entering into the market, sorry, my mic, in the near future in Europe, both for manned and unmanned aviation. We decided to take a very transparent approach so that all stakeholders today designing or willing to operate such vehicles could have access to the same level of information, base their design on a common set of requirements. And also, as an additional step, we wanted general public to be fully aware of what was going on, what was were the requirement that we were designing for this kind of vehicle. And so we went for public consultations for a number of major points concerning these vehicles, as we do think this is a key for the acceptance of these vehicles in urban environments, for instance. And this is also one of the reasons why we want to reach out more people, stakeholders via our participation in European Rotors. We really aim at not only aviation specialists, but also new startups that may discover aviation world, operator, maintenance organizations, mechanics, pilots, to really feedback us with their concern, ideas, or new way of doing. Doing so, we had an approach where we had a kind of a building block or stepped approach. We cannot do everything at the same time. So we moved step by step on this, I would say, very complex subject. We look at the options and all the flexibility we had, and we came up with a special condition VTOL, which was published last year in 2019, around July, for public consultation, and which is now in its final version published on EASA website. This special condition is setting up the scene of the requirement for all VTOL that are designed in Europe and potentially worldwide, because we have a lot of, I would say, non-European stakeholders coming to us to try to figure out and understand a bit better. So this first step was the definition of the certification requirement. Here also we've taken an approach which was quite innovative, with performance-based standard without prescriptive requirement, to enable manufacturers or startups to use the maximum flexibility in their approach to design their vehicles, and also because we are facing a number of configurations which are ranging from multi-rotor, vector thrust, combination, fully electric, hybrids, conventional type of vehicles, so able to handle all these points. And also trying to match as much as possible all business models which are popping up here and there, and offering also different technology trade-offs. That was, and the scope of the special condition has been for person carrying VTOL, heavier than air, within the small category, because that's the first one we are facing today. And with multiple lift thrust unit. When we say multiple, is above than 2, so starting at 3, so that we are not mixing with conventional rotorcraft requirements. And there are a lot of novelties or innovation in this requirement. You know, we can also innovate in the regulation aspects. For instance, for the first time, we have mixed operation and airworthiness. Depending on the operation, you will end up with different level of safety, either basic category or enhanced category. We have also integrated the recorders, because we do think that for this kind of vehicles, it's very important to build up a huge database of data that we could use later on to, I would say, better analyze the requirement and how we can amend them, looking very deeply into the data. That was the first step. The second step was also to address the propulsion systems. This propulsion system, we issued also special conditions, let's say beginning of this year, which was on electric and hybrid propulsion systems. The consultation period just went over recently, and we are beginning the work to analyze them, and then it will be published as a final version by the end of the year. Here we are addressing the complete range of propulsion system, from fully electric to hybrid, and based on batteries or not, or other technologies. Here also performance-based, enabling a second wave of requirement for the manufacturer to design their system. And very recently, in May, beginning of June, we issued the first what we call priority ones means of compliance. So how to make sure that you are compliant with the requirement on the eVTOL. And here we are proposing some means of compliance from flight load, structure, handling qualities, high energy fragment, burst track, emergency landing conditions, energy storage, crash resistance, fly-by-wire design, lightning and earth, and also recorder installation. So quite an extensive first steps. and that was priority 1 based on industry feedback where they need a big impact on design. The consultation is on and will be ending on the 21st of July. And of course, we will present the outcome at the next session of the eVTOL and Rotorcraft Symposium during European Rotors. In parallel, we are also working on the second wave, on the priority 2 means of compliance, which will be presented as a first during also European Rotors and during the eVTOL session by the EASA experts who are working on that, like we did last year for some of the priority 1. Lastly, in parallel, we are also working with standardization bodies such as EuropeanRotors to establish other means of compliance together with the industry. Of course, it's a permanent dialogue to enable this vehicle to enter into the market as we speak. Looking forward to European Rotors, really, as I said, EASA will host the Rotorcraft and eVTOL Symposium during this event, which will take place during between the 10th and the 11th of November. The session of the Wednesday afternoon, the 11th, will be dedicated to the means of compliance on eVTOL. So really, I invite you to join us to, if you are interested in these technologies, and where all experts will really explain the background of the proposed second wave of minor compliance. It will be a very good opportunity for everybody who is attending to provide direct feedback, to also ask questions, and we will, as much as possible, answer as much as we can. In addition to the symposium part, there will be some sessions live also in the main, I would say, exhibit hall, where several key, I would say, keynote speakers will present eVTOL aspects, whether it is probably on the propulsion sides or other. It will be organized by obviously Messe Friedrichshafen and European Rotors organization for this live session. As a closing statement, I would like to say that we are working extensively on VTOL aspects, eVTOL, but not only. We are working also on gyroplane, which could be partially some answer in some also environment. And by the way, we have published also a special condition on that. Rotor and a number of electrical and hybrid VTOL with distributed propulsion. Industry is coming with new ideas, and we are excited by all these challenges. At the same time, we need to keep our feet on ground, and sometimes looks a bit severe, but at least we are really convinced that safety will be paramount for public acceptance. And you know, if we have a couple of crashes early on during the development of these vehicles, the market will disappear and vanish. So that's difficult sometimes for some companies to fully understand these aspects, but aviation has always been different with regards to this kind of public awareness and the expectations on the safety level. Nevertheless, even though we are right now going through, and especially aviation, very, I would say, tough times and challenging times, it's a pivoting moment that will enable aviation to change, probably much faster than anticipated, and we must be able to cope with it and be better at the end of the day, better in safety, but also better in the green and environmental aspects. And I'm sure we will achieve that all together via an open and transparent dialogue, and that's what we are currently doing. Thank you for that. I will give the word to Peter Müller, chairman of the European Helicopter Association, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you may have at the end of the session. Thank you very much.
Very interesting points from David at this point, and I think especially these difficult times which you're speaking here, which you're mentioning, I think, like always, there are challenges and chances, and we try to grab the chances. So Peter, please give us the point of view of the Helicopter Association and what you're planning for the autumn.
Yeah, thank you very much, Willi. Thank you very much, David, for your words. Yes, so I'm the chairman of the European Helicopter Association. So the members of the European Helicopter Association are the national helicopter associations, and in those countries where there are no national helicopter associations, single operators can also become a direct member of the European Helicopter Association. Yeah, we are proud and we are looking forward to the creation of the new European eVTOL event. EHA, together with EASA, supported by Messe Friedrichshafen, will organize this new event, European Rotors. And the European Rotors will be the new leading VTOL platform in Europe, bringing together all the leading actors of the VTOL industry, including the OEMs, the operators, the regulator, as already mentioned, technicians, pilots, students who will develop the future of the aviation industry. Talking about VTOL, as David already mentioned, this segment of aviation includes the classic helicopter, but also the new developments in the area of eVTOL, as David already explained. Therefore, it is one of our top priorities to have the eVTOL manufacturers, the suppliers, and the research and development entities representing the activities in eVTOL participating in European Rotors. We are looking forward to receive an outlook on the future of the eVTOL technology and to discuss chances and challenges on this sector. I've received this question very often in the past, which is where do you see the market of drones, air taxis, either manned or unmanned compared to helicopters in the future? Well, that is depending on what will be technically and legally feasible. Generally speaking, drones, if we talk about drones, which also belong to VTOL, can be of complementary use to traditional helicopters. In any case, helicopter operators would be qualified as drone operators as they do have the aviation technical and regulatory knowledge. Depending on the mission, the VTOL helicopter operator would use either manned VTOL or rotorcraft, so the new generation, or the legacy aircraft, rotorcraft, or smaller drones, or a mix of all. As an example, if we talk about blade inspections on onshore wind farm, that might be done with drones. On the other hand, if we talk on blade inspections on offshore wind farms, a helicopter or a new eVTOL would be more cost efficient because of range and endurance. Search and rescue missions. Search and rescue missions, especially in mountains, as an example, after an avalanche. A drone, an unmanned vehicle, could be sent out first, also in minimal weather conditions, to do a first search and tracing of victims, and then a helicopter could follow for the actual rescue mission. Or we have seen already examples in the past of transport of urgently needed medical equipment or organs, blood, etc., which does not weigh a lot, from hospital to hospital or from the mainland to small and remote islands like we have them in northern Germany. Urban air mobility. In mega cities like Sao Paulo, New York, Mexico City, helicopters are operating as air taxis for decades now. But growing public disinformation caused by noise and pollution issues could be counteracted by using new propulsion technologies, as explained before by David, such, for example, as electric or electric hybrid solutions. And there are a lot more of applications for drones and new technology eVTOLs, like logistics, precision farming, and so on. Another question was, why can the new eVTOLs perform these additional operations which helicopters cannot do now? Well, I would say that helicopters could, I would not say that helicopters could not do these jobs. However, in many cases, these new technology eVTOLs may have lower operational costs or may operate more environmental friendly. The eVTOL manufacturers are promising lower acquisition costs per aircraft due to the quantity they hope to produce, lower operational costs due to the new propulsion and optimized propeller and rotor systems. We are curious to see the real numbers in the future. However, as David also mentioned, there are still some barriers to pass to get them operational, like meeting the required safety standards when operating overhead congested areas, collision avoidance using the same airspace as manned aircraft, infrastructure, vertiports, including charging facilities, need to be created. The population needs to be convinced that the technology is safe. Sufficient payload needs to be available. Sufficient endurance range needs to be available. Promising concepts with the right mix of range and payload seem to be tilt rotor solutions, for example. As you can see, the traditional VTOL helicopter industry is curious to receive more updates about the new eVTOL technology and the opportunities it will offer to the operators. European Rotors will be the platform for the entire VTOL market of tomorrow to share and discuss information with all players, with the authorities, the manufacturers, suppliers, operators, and the end customer.
Thank you, Peter. And yeah, you talked now about what you say, perhaps the vintage helicopters in contrast to the eVTOL. I think in future it will be really always this mix, because there are the missions, and the missions define what will be the aircraft which can do it. We now will have Hendrik Boelens from, actually, I would say at least Germans, but also worldwide, one of the leading and the first VTOL manufacturer, which we all have seen already operating in different countries. So yeah, Hendrik, please give us your point of view and where you see the whole environment, the microcosm of aviation going to develop.
Absolutely. So first, thanks for having me in this panel. I'd be happy to elaborate on how we see this new market. So maybe just to start with, what are we targeting as Volocopter? So if we jump to the next slide there, Volocopter is designing an aircraft, but that's not the ultimate goal. Our goal is essentially to offer mobility as a service. So we want to operate the urban air mobility service, meaning that we are both working on the aircraft as well as developing the service, because we realize that the success will eventually depend on offering an end-to-end attractive service to the customers, and also working hand in hand with public bodies and with authorities on the public acceptance of such products. So it would be too simplistic just to look at building an aircraft that fulfills the performance parameters. We actually need to look at it more holistically, which is why we are also investing in building the appropriate ground infrastructure that actually integrates seamlessly with existing city designs, which of course you cannot redesign the city to integrate such a new mode of transportation. To start just with the first enabler, which still is the aircraft, the Volocopter is actually purposely designed for this particular mission. So for urban air mobility, it has 2 seats, so it is not autonomous, at least not the version that we are certifying at the moment. It has a pilot and 1 passenger, which is why we think we can be on the market very quickly. The reason why the Volocopter looks the way it looks is actually the exact arguments that were mentioned before in the panel. If you want to fly into cities, safety comes first. So the Volocopter has been designed first with safety in the back of our minds. There's a lot of redundancy and other features into the design that make it safe. That's where we are fully in alignment also with what was said before there. The operating costs were mentioned as well, but I think what's even more important and what's actually differentiating the Volocopter from many other designs is the low noise emissions. Because if we're talking about environmentally friendly, we're not just talking about carbon dioxide, for example, emissions, which of course are an important component. In our fully electric aircraft, we don't have these emissions, but at least as important for the inner city emissions is also the noise emissions. And I'll provide some more data on that later. The Volocopter is really the benchmark for low noise in the inner city, which is also what's differentiating it from legacy helicopters in this case. So this is just showing why 35 kilometers, even in let's say legacy aviation, that is not a long range. For the missions which we are targeting in the inner city is actually more than enough. For the 100 cities that Volocopter wants to operate in the first years, 93% of those cities have their airport within the 30 kilometers of the city center. So we can actually already perform in 93% of those cities the mission of transferring people from the airport to the city center and back. So we have to really, be open for these new types of missions and design a product that is actually meeting the performance requirements for that particular mission. And the new technology bricks that are enabling eVTOLs are actually allowing us to do just that. We'll see what it actually means in terms of noise. So we have a reference here for a legacy helicopter that is flying at 120 meters distance, overflight, which is 87 decibels. The Volocopter in the same situation is only 68 decibels. Now it's a logarithmic scale, as you know, so it's difficult to compare generally, but here that means that it is 4 times quieter than a legacy helicopter that could perform the same mission. And we're absolutely convinced that that is going to be the differentiator why the Volocopter is actually suitable for this particular type of missions. You see that it's 68 decibels compared to the typical 73 decibels which you have as a background noise in a typical megacity. So we expect that you will actually not hear it when it's flying over the city. And what's even more important, during landing and takeoff, it's also very silent, which is, of course, the enabler to perform this type of mission. We've been working hard on public acceptance here. So I think you are aware that we have shown public demonstrations around the world, in Helsinki, in Stuttgart, in Singapore, in Dubai. This is not just to show that it's working, but it's also really to show to people that this technology is here, that it is here to stay, and that it's actually ready to be deployed. So people can come and experience it. And we believe that's extremely important for the public acceptance, that people are not afraid of this new technology, that they can come, they can see it in action, and they can actually start to see how this could fit into their daily lives, which I think is a very, very important component here. Of course, the technology is one thing, then actually getting it to the market is the next step. One important point on our journey there was the recognition by EASA as an approved design organization, so the Part 21J design organization approval, which Volocopter attained at the end of last year, which is actually now enabling us to progress with the type certification activity and actually come to type certification of the aircraft. Speaking specifically also about the special condition for eVTOL aircraft that David mentioned before. So we've actually been very enthusiastic about the exchange with EASA on having a certification baseline for this particular type of aircraft for eVTOLs, because they have very specific characteristics that don't make them fit very well in an existing box. So they are not CS-23 aircraft, they are not CS-27 aircraft. They have very particular properties and characteristics, and we feel that this is the right approach, the special condition, to actually certify these aircrafts. Of course, now we're, as you mentioned before, we are in the process of the needs of compliance established for the aircraft. And I think there as well, we're on a very good track to actually come to an agreement on how to actually certify the aircraft, how to show compliance to the certification standards there. And of course, Volocopter, as you know, is not just designing and building the Volo City aircraft for manned flights. We're also developing what we call our Volo drone, which can be used for different types of missions, also urban air mobility, but for logistics applications, so non-human cargo, if you will. Use it for aircrane operations, agricultural applications. There are a large number of potential applications that we see for this aircraft. And of course, the beauty is that you can rely on, to a large extent, on the same types of technology here, the same technology bricks, to make derivatives of this kind of product. Right, so we as well are very happy that we now have this new forum, the European Rotors, to actually display our Volocopter. So we'll be displaying a Volocopter there as well for everybody to see. Again, we hope that this leads to public acceptance, that people can actually come, sit inside the Volocopter, see the Volocopter, feel it, touch it, and see that this is becoming real. And it's not something of a futuristic dream, but it's here today and it's here to stay. And we're very happy to have this new broad forum to be able to display this product. Thank you.
Where do you see eVTOL can add on to the yet existing part of aviation you're doing?
Yes, thank you very much for having us in this discussion. Indeed, we might be one of the future operators of such technology. Having said that, you know, what we're talking about, and I think this is also important from a regulative point of view, we need flying objects, you know, and whether it's an eVTOL or a flying carpet, you know, or a helicopter is not really relevant for us in terms of technology. What is relevant is, can we do it in a safe way? Can we do it in an affordable way in terms of cost? Can we do it in a reliable way in terms not only of safety, but that it works day on day and day on? And last but not least, and this has been mentioned a couple of times, can we do it in a way that there's a certain public acceptance? Because pollution in terms of air pollution, but even more in terms of noise, as it has been mentioned a few times today, are paramount, and I would even say crucial. Otherwise, there's a little chance of public acceptance, you know, if we don't solve some of the noise problems that we have today. So as one of the potential operators, I'd be happy to show you a couple of slides of the ideas we have about using those new technologies. If you can be so kind to put the slides on, and we can start on page 2 if you like. Maybe as a background information, as you know, we are an EMS operator, helicopter emergency services. And what might surprise some people is that roughly 65 to 70% of our missions, we do not transport a patient. We are basically a taxi for the doctor and the paramedic, which means that for a large variety of missions, the big size of the helicopters that we have today is not necessarily something that we need for sure. So our vision basically is to optimize the EMS system by transporting medical staff with eVTOLs. EMS stands for Emergency Medical Services. And as I said a couple of seconds ago, the vast majority of our missions, we do not transport the patient on the flying machine, but we transport them roadside, or they're being picked up by roadside ambulances. Today, if we take Germany as an example, there's a total number of roughly 5 million patients per year that are being saved by a doctor. The vast majority of these missions, 4.9 million, are ground-based, and roughly 100,000 EMS missions in Germany every year are being performed by helicopters. This is the situation today. We believe that for various developments in today's society, the number of EMS operations in the future may even increase further than it is already today. To give you a rough idea, there's roughly 10,000 emergency doctors in Germany, and unfortunately, the trend here is actually in the other direction, which means that there are less and less doctors that are available to do this kind of job, which means that transporting the doctor quickly, you know, and without obstacles to a patient will rise in importance and relevance in the future, because if the requirements and the need increases and the available doctors decreases, It's a quick math to realize that transportation and quick transportation will be one of the solutions to the system. And if you look at the number of multicopters today and in the EMS system, the number is 0. And we believe that within, 5 to 10 years after implementation of such a technology in the system, the numbers may rise up to 200 to 300 in Germany. To give you an idea, today there's roughly 70 to 80 EMS helicopters operating in Germany. So you see that the number of multicopters is way higher than the number of helicopters we have today. And I do not believe that the new technology will be a substitution, for the helicopters or the ground ambulance. It will be, as you said earlier, Willi, in addition to the system. It may substitute and cannibalize something like 5 to 15% of the actual technologies, but I think that the cake will grow, and it will not be taking market shares from actual players. Just very quickly to give you an idea of the partners involved in the project that we have right now, which is a study. We have obviously the manufacturer of Volocopter, we're doing an amazing job. We have the Institut für Notfallmedizin, which is a well-renowned institute for emergency medicine in Germany. We have the German DLR, Deutsches Luft- und Raumfahrtzentrum. We have ADAC Air Rescue, the company I'm responsible for, and our mother company, which is a non-profit foundation. And we have 2 German regions, Rheinland-Pfalz and Bayern and Bavaria, who are being partners in this study to help us analyze whether this technology has a chance in the future or not. And if you look on the next chart, these are the things we're looking at. We're looking at it from a medical aspect, from a regulations aspect, operational aspects, political and public acceptance, economical and technical aspects. So it's a quite wide-based study. Ideally, tomorrow we would need a machine, again, a flying carpet or a multicopter, that has a range of roughly 150 kilometers. Has a ground speed of roughly above 100 kilometers per hour, a payload of up to 200 kilos. Basically, we need to transport 2 passengers and some very limited medical equipment. And ideally, being able to fly during the night with poor visibility and then some wind, but we are not in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean or at the North Pole, so the weather conditions we have in Central Europe, at least, are quite reasonable, which means that the technology and the safety levels we have today would be sufficient. This is an overview of some of the results we have today, and basically what we found out is that for the cities, for the inner cities, the ground transportations will still be the element of choice. But as soon as we go in the more rural areas, as soon as we leave the big city centers, the eVTOL technology definitely has an advantage towards the ground-based systems. We will publish the results of this study towards the end of this year, I believe in October or November. So around the European Rotors Forum, the first results of the study will be published publicly, and we'll be happy to do that, of course, with the partners mentioned above. We are currently in the feasibility study, which is to be finished by October this year. If everything works up to plan, we will do some flight tests over the next 2 years, and ideally start with some really pilot missions and pilot programs in the 2 regions of Bavaria and in Rheinland-Pfalz in 2023, 2024. Obviously, there's still some work to do in this direction, and this is why there are a couple of things that I would like to mention, and it would be a wish list, to EASA and to other partners. I think that one of the major aspects is to have performance-based regulation, and then ideally neutral from technology and really performance-based, and not only on hypothesis of what could happen, but really what are the experiences and how we can, do this in a pragmatic way. The second thing is, obviously, when you speak about this kind of technology, air taxis are the thing that everybody thinks about. And the difference between air taxis and an EMS operation is that we do not fly in predefined corridors. So we need a regulation, that will allow us to land and start everywhere and not only on defined landing spots and airports. Maybe not in the first step, but in the near future, in the further developments of the regulation, we will need the possibility, like today in EMS, to start and land everywhere. One of the first steps could be to, the landing sites we have today at hospital sites, for example, make those also certified for this kind of technology. That would be a first step, and then a second step, being able to start and land on the street and gardens, obviously with all the necessary safety regulations, but having some flexibility in the operation. And I believe that this is one of the aspects that need to be considered. We are talking in our case about EMS, so it's when you drive with a car with the blue lights, you have some rights that others don't. And our conviction is that with this kind of technology, with the idea of saving lives, with this technology, public acceptance will certainly be very high at the beginning, and this might be an entry door for public acceptance for other types of utilization of these assets. So we're very excited to move on and go on, and very thankful to be part of this history making steps that we're looking at right now, and looking forward to the further discussion. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Frédéric, and thank you for this point of view, which I think is a widening of the horizon, because right now in the public discussion, most of the time, multicopters, air taxi, and then flying with hundreds of thousands of aircraft into the inner cities, which probably will not happen that fast. And so I'm very happy to hear some point of view of a very useful, a relatively small kind of operation which could prove these aircraft be valid. So after having now all the players of the VTOL market, representatives of all the players of the VTOL market on the let's say virtual stage which we have here, I'm now happy to have last but not least Tobias Bretzel from Messe Friedrichshafen. You're putting on the AERO over years, over more than 30 years with the general aviation. Now you move on together with the European Helicopter Association to do the European Rotors. So please let us know, how does Messe Friedrichshafen, how does you visualize the European Rotors show can be for us as visitors?
Yes, thank you, Willi. First of all, we want to address that we are really delighted to be the partner of EHA and EASA in organizing this new and very important event, the European Rotors, happening in Cologne from November the 10th till November the 12th. So a very, very important date, which every industry professional from the whole VTOL sector should have in their calendar, especially after the previous times with very less personal meetings. We think that it is very, very important to finally re-engage face-to-face with all the necessary security aspects. As you already mentioned, Willi, yes, Messe Friedrichshafen has organized and is organizing AERO Friedrichshafen, the leading general aviation trade show in Europe since more than 20 years. And within that show, we are focused at a very early stage, Willi, you know it, in 2009 already, on electric aviation at our dedicated eFlightexpo. So we want to bring our experience and especially our network, which we have gathered over the last 10 years and more within electric aviation for this new event in Cologne. Why? Because we see that especially the eVTOLs are more and more evolving into the commercial aviation area, also within the helicopter industry. And therefore, we really strongly want to encourage the whole eVTOL community which supported us with AERO Friedrichshafen in the last years, also to join us really this fall at European Rotors. Thank you so much.
I think in perhaps one of the future discussions we will have here, we also will have the options of people when it's live to join in with questions. At this point, it's going to be me who asking most of the questions. Frédéric, you said that you, in your desires, would like to have a helicopter which can fly 100, or a multicopter, or the flying carpet which can fly 150 kilometers. At this point, I think Volocopter is not yet there, but still are there a lot of missions at ADACLuftrettung right now where you could use also the shorter range, where when we will have only the 35 minutes, which is the operation time, with a limited speed, we are shorter. Are there enough missions there?
Yes, I think, we have to look at it from a development point of view. If you look at their first Volkswagen Golf, this car had a range of roughly 300 kilometers, and today the Golf 8 or 9, I don't even know which it is, has a range of roughly 1,200 kilometers, and then obviously technology develops a lot faster in aviation, or a lot faster these days than it used to do. So the answer is yes. I think for the pilot project, the actual technology is sufficient. If we look at the requirements for, having 200 to 300 of those flying machines flying around in Germany, then we'll need the ranges that we've been talking about. And, we have to be flexible and have a lot of ideas. And we could start, with having a quick battery change at the accident site. Many times there's a roadside ambulance there, so they could have a spare battery on board. We could have, one small mission, just flying one mission and flying back. The 150 kilometers is the range that we need to be able to fly 1, 2, 3, 4 missions after one another. So to answer your question, yes, for the pilot project, I'm sure that this would be sufficient. And of course, other technologies might be interesting in the first step, looking at hybrid versions. So this might be a solution to extend the range. But we have to believe in it, and then when EMS started 50 years ago for us, a lot of people said it's impossible. When my predecessor said we will land on a highway with a helicopter, people called them crazy. 50 years later, we've done it 1 million times, just as ADAC. And this is something that no one would have imagined 50 years ago. And I'm believing, that we are going to find solutions in the next month and years that are unthinkable today. So I'm very confident that there will be solutions. And one of the challenges will be regulations, not because regulation is an obstacle, but we have to have a technology and a way of operating that will be safe. And regulation can enhance this and help us, to find ways to do this in a safe way. Not only for the public, but for ourselves.
Talking about regulations, I have a question there on Peter. I know you're a helicopter pilot, and on David, because you would need pilots for this kind of aircraft, and they have to be kind of professional pilots when they have to have these missions like ADACLuftrettung. So would you, for the beginning, think it will be professional helicopter pilots sitting on board, maneuvering the, for example, Volocopters or others? Or do you think there will be a totally new qualification? Perhaps David first, and then we can have Peter from his pilot point of view.
Thank you, Willi. This is a very valid question. Actually, we do think that at the beginning, it will be a qualified pilot, either coming from helicopter license or fixed wing license, and then with some complement, obviously, to be able to pilot these vehicles, which will be quite special. And the complement will come out from the operational suitability data that is established during the type certificate process together with the manufacturer. So that's the very initial step. And so we will build up the bridge with the conventional pilot licenses, I would say, to enable the piloting of these vehicles. Later on, or in parallel, we'll see how fast it's developing and how much is the need. We may also enable an ab initio qualification license dedicated to VTOL, eVTOL. And actually, what we are thinking of is a qualification that is much more flexible than today, which will be dependent upon the level of automation the vehicle will be fitted with. So either like very basic helicopters today without automation, which is not the case of all these machines. They are all fly-by-wire by their nature, or up to extremely autonomous with some possibility to have auto-land capability, automatic takeoff, almost, I would say, no pilot input. But more a monitoring phase rather than a piloting really. So all this range will be covered via some license which will be based on automation. And that's where we are heading towards. Up to at some point in time, because everybody, at least in this market, is working on a fully autonomous vehicle. But that's probably for a much later stage than the initial steps we are looking at. But we have that in mind to be able to bridge all the gaps and make sure that first there will be a pool of pilots being able to make the entry into service at the very initial stage. Then if everybody will need 200 to 300 vehicles like ADAC for their operations, obviously the pool of pilots will need to be increased, and ab initio training, depending on the level of the machines, will be implemented in the regulations. Peter, I don't know if you want to complement.
No, he dropped out. Okay, we'll have to fill the time until he comes back in. So talking about automatization, I would like to give this question to Jan Hendrik, because we had now first the question of the distance, like can you imagine having, for example, a battery swap in a ADACLuftrettungsmission first, and second, when do you think your aircraft will be as far automated that you could also have a non-professional pilot executing this kind of missions?
Okay, yep. So first on the battery swap, we're absolutely convinced that the battery swap is the right approach to take on this type of aircraft. Where we are operating, space will be limited, so we will not want to stay on the ground all the time charging batteries. I mean, this is even a pain for electric cars nowadays. It's approaching points where the pain point is reduced, charging times are reducing. On aircraft, there are different limitations, so I think the charging times in the beginning will be quite high for non-swapping systems. So on our side, we are absolutely convinced that, especially in the beginning, swapping the batteries is the way to keep the aircraft in the air, make sure that they are actually operating, making money, servicing customers. On the automation part, I think in the beginning it's a very incremental approach to start with a pilot, because it's a technology that we know. As a pilot, we have a very flexible sensor, actuator, computer. The pilot can do many things that many systems would otherwise have to combine. So that's a very good way to begin. Going one step further and thinking about what it could look like after that, if we see today how fast self-driving cars are progressing, I know they're not quite there yet, I know they're also still in development, but if we just imagine what that means for technology, the problem to be solved in the air is principally a lot simpler than on the ground, especially in the inner city. So I can imagine with the current stage of acceleration in technology that it's really on the horizon to have fully automated missions. I mean, most of the large airliners are flying for most of their flights fully automated, with the pilot just being monitored. So there's no real reason why this should not work on air taxis.
And I would have a question at this time to Tobias, because we heard before that Frédéric said that they expect only 5 bis until maximum 50% of cannibalization, saying helicopters being replaced by multicopters, but in general would more see the market grow and giving new opportunities for aviation. So Tobias, do you think, because you have done the AERO, at the AERO you have helicopters, now you do European Rotors, do you see this more complementary, or do you see this as more as a conflict of interest that it will take away the helicopters from AERO?
No, absolutely not, because it's two different kind of trade shows, keeping in mind that European Rotors will be a dedicated 3-day B2B event, very focused on the rotorcraft and the whole eVTOL market. So it's a completely different setup than what we have at AERO, where we thinking of the helicopter hall, also targeting more the lighter segment and also more the GA part of that industry. So for us, it's absolutely not cannibalizing at all.
Okay. Another one question I mentioned this early in the beginning to David. When you came out with the scVTOL, there was a big discussion, I remember in Cologne there, on the no single point of failure approach for this class, which is not existing in the Part 23 or Part 27 at this point. So now the means of compliance are out. Which are the ways for the manufacturers where they can work around, perhaps, if there is a single point of failure which cannot be replaced, which cannot be doubled? Because like in a helicopter, I think also in multicopters, probably there will be the option or some cases where you cannot just take it and double it for making it more safe or having a redundancy.
To answer your questions first, when you look at, I would say, the overall configurations of all these machines, they are highly redundant per definition. They are distributed lift, so of course they are fully redundant. Most of them are, if not all of them that we've seen, are fly-by-wire. Here also, you cannot rely on a single set of computer. So it's really, per design, the single point of failure is already much more achievable than conventional helicopters. Then you have indeed, probably in some specific area and mostly on the structure side, some point where it will not make sense to have a fully multiple load pass or a redundant, I would say, design. And for that, if you look carefully at the means of compliance we are proposing an alternative method where when the design is simple, let's say you have a wing with a simple spar, and doubling the spar will either be not feasible due to space issue or will bring more drawbacks than any benefit, because you have hidden, I would say, areas you cannot inspect. You could have some corrosion development that you cannot see, cracks development, which would be also hidden within the structure. Then when it is simply loaded, simple structure, straightforward and with some margin, we are what we call develop with damage tolerance. We will obviously enable this kind of design. I think it's answering probably 99.99% of the concern we've received during the first set of publication of the requirement, and it's clarifying a lot the designs of the machines. Maybe we will face the 0.01% issue, which I have some doubt right now, but we never know. We never know. And for that, we have still the possibility to develop alternative means of compliance, which would be very specific to the type of design, and it will be on a case-by-case basis. But to really speak more generally, I think people focus on that. And actually, within their design, when we look at it, say, guys, you are already meeting that by far. And sometimes you are more redundant than it would be necessary, strictly speaking, for the pure safety. So the focus is really on, yes, it is possible, do your maximum. We want to avoid a single point of failure, which is the main drawback of a helicopter. Today, in some configuration, you can lose a bolt, and some recent accidents show that, and you are crashing a helicopter. we are not willing to have that. And you can imagine that if you have multiple operations on a daily basis, high utilization of this machine, the probability will get much, much higher than what would be acceptable on a single bolt. So I guess the alternative is fairly fair, reasonable, pragmatic enough for all the designs to meet this criteria.
Thank you for this answer. And I'm quite sure that in Cologne, we will have a lot of discussions on this topic. And it's great to hear that the discussion is evolving because this is the base of getting aircraft into the air, that we find solutions where we can certify and be safe at the same time. As we have you back here, Peter, again, the question, what does the European Helicopter Association think about having automated flight and having which license will be needed for multicopters in the beginning, should be used for multicopter in the beginning, to be more clear? And what do you think of automated flying? Do you think that that's a good idea, or do you think this only will come very, very far in the future?
Okay, so licensing, I think Volocopter, it's a helicopter with a higher number of rotors and with a lot of automation. So I think there will be bridging possibilities from rotorcraft license, commercial helicopter pilot license, to a multi-copter pilot license. It just has to be defined. Concerning automatic automation, yeah, I think a high level of automation would be appreciated. Like Hendrik already said before, automation is today standard also in bigger aircraft. So why not in a Volocopter?
Okay, thank you. I have to close the session due to time reasons. Time is going really fast. A lot of interesting topics. Hope we will continue it in preparation for the European Rotors show. And so I think, if not online during the next month, we definitely see you at the European Rotors show in Cologne. Perhaps we'll see even a Volocopter flying there, which would be great. Okay, so thank you very much for this time, and stay healthy, and thank you. See you in Cologne.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.